So there's this poll out today. So 46% of voters in a YouGov survey claim they want a second referendum on Brexit within the next decade.
That's right. Although Labour have said it would renegotiate parts of the divorce deal to deliver a closer trading relationship with the EU. Would you like to see a second Brexit vote? Well, we're joined now by former Labour advisers Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider. Good morning, James. Thank you very much for joining us. So what do you make of this YouGov polls with a significant number of people saying that they would like a second referendum, not right now, but at some time in the future?
Well, just to clear up one thing, I'm not a left-wing Brexiteer. I campaigned for Remain, but when the majority of people voted to leave, I thought that we should leave because that was the democratic thing to do.
OK. I stand corrected.
But I don't want to have a second referendum either. I think that a lot of the Brexit debate was not terribly helpful. And Brexit isn't just one thing. Britain needs to find a new geoeconomic strategy. And we could have found one through a particular type of Brexit, a more kind of left-wing socialist type of Brexit. But that's not what we're getting. And we're also not getting probably what you all want, a kind of, more right-wing, more libertarian type of Brexit. And instead, we're just getting a version of what we had before, but a less good version of that. So I can see why there's a lot of so-called...
James, I think you just described yourself as I think you did just describe yourself as somebody that would like to see a socialist type of Brexit. But what would that look like? Just explain that to me.
So we would use the powers that we took back from the EU to expand public services and to invest in industries and technologies that we need, to take more of the supply chain back into the UK, to use public procurement to advance social, economic and ecological ends. So it would be about that sort of, thing.
OK, James.
But anyway, that's very much not what's happening.
And James, that is why I absolutely believe that Jeremy Corbyn was a Brexiteer, because he wanted to nationalise everything, and he couldn't do that under the European Union. Mark Francois, turning to you, do you think the Remain establishment will ever accept the Brexit referendum, or will this best of three rattle on for decades and decades to come?
I think there will be a lot of people in what you call the Remain establishment, others might call the blob, who will never come to terms with it. But this I know. I sat in Parliament for 3 years, night after night, week after week, month after month, watching Keir Starmer collude with pro-Europeans across the House to do everything he could to keep us in the EU. And also he was calling night after night for a second referendum. That's where his heart lies. That said, I believe they wouldn't want to risk it, because if you remember in the referendum we did have, right until the last minute, the polls said Remain was going to win, pretty much. So they wouldn't want to grant a poll. They'd do it all by grandmother's footsteps. It'd be, or perhaps we should be a bit more closely aligned to the single market, or maybe we should rejoin the customs union. Oh, look, we're almost back in, so we might as well go the whole hog. They would deny the British people the choice. Why? Because in his heart of hearts, I saw him night after night, Keir Starmer remains a Remainer.
James, is that the direction of travel? Do you think baby steps, death by 1,000, paper cuts, endless treaties, closer alignment, and then Starmer can pop the big question in a decade's time, which is what this poll says?
So I think it's very comforting for politicians who are in the Leave camp, to say that it's all the fault of Remain politicians who then tried to stifle it. Because, of course, there were Remain politicians who were trying to stifle it. That's true. But the reason it hasn't worked isn't because of their stifling. It's because none of the Leave campaigners had any plan for what we would do after we left. There isn't a plan, and so we haven't followed one. So what we've got is a whole load of ugly fudges and halfway houses. So in the condition where we aren't going to have a different geoeconomic strategy that works, we're better off having a slightly less bad version of the one that we had before, which is probably what we'll get with Labour, with repairing some of the trading relationship with the EU.
Well, Mark Francois, you didn't have a plan, you just had a load of ugly fudge. What's your take on that?
What we had, I saw it night after night. I even read a book about it, Spartan Victory. It's still available on Amazon, by the way. And, 3 years of absolute trench warfare with Remainers in the House of Commons.
What was your plan? Yeah, OK, fine. I was there as well. I watched it. It was very frustrating and very boring. But it remains the case that the people that campaigned to leave without a plan for what we would do, how we would come out.
James, you've asked Mark for his plan. Allow him to spell out what it is.
Don't rewrite history. You know exactly what happened. Theresa May came up with a withdrawal agreement. It wasn't a very good one. In the end, she couldn't get it through Parliament. Her premiership ultimately fell on it. Boris Johnson came in with a better version. It did get it through Parliament. We legally left the European Union. We had the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe. We had an independent foreign policy over Ukraine. We've just signed a Trans-Pacific Partnership deal around the globe, $11 trillion worth of market every year. So it did work in the end, James, and it worked despite Keir Starmer and the vast bulk of the Labour Party spending 3 years, night after night, trying to overturn the democratic decision of the British people.
Obviously, we left the EU, and as I said at the top, I think that's a good thing because that's what people voted.
Yes, but no thanks to the Labour Party.
My point is, though, do you reckon it's working?
Yes, I've just given you 3 examples of how it's working. So, yes, I do believe that it's working.
Let's take the terrible corporate rights enhancing farmer hurting TPP deal that you had, which is tiny in trade. It's 0.0 blah, 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 blah. It's going to increase and it enhances corporate rights.
Well, sorry, it's a market of up to $11 trillion a year. That's not tiny, is it?
The possibility for corporations to sue governments when they change policy. So that could be policies that you like, that are people democratically vote for, that get passed in Parliament, that companies can then sue us for pursuing. That's not some fantastic win.
I know where you're coming from, James.
Talking about an independent foreign policy. Our foreign policy in Ukraine would have been absolutely the same, regardless of whether we're in the EU or not. The EU wasn't a foreign policy.
Well, I'm sorry. We all know what Jeremy Corbyn's policy is.
The same as the EU.
James, I'm sorry.
James, we all know what your previous boss, Jeremy Corbyn's policy on Ukraine and Russia was. Russia could do no wrong. That's why he was destroyed in the general election. Or at least it's one of the reasons.
I mean, either you're ignorant or you're deliberately misinforming the viewers of this channel. Jeremy Corbyn has an extremely long-standing, almost certainly much more long-standing than you, record of opposition to authoritarianism, to money laundering, and to violent practices underneath when Putin has been in charge of Russia.
What about Salisbury? Sorry, how do you explain what he did over the Salisbury poisoning? How do you explain that if he's such a fierce critic of Russia? Sorry, you're completely rewriting history here.
No, I didn't hear what you said.
Jeremy Corbyn tried to explain away what Russia had done. I was in the Commons, I saw him do it.
OK, gentlemen, let's pull this.
He hasn't tried to explain it away. I think it is quite important to understand what's going on.
Can we pull
trying to understand what's going on is a good thing. But have a look at what Corbyn has said about the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Has he condemned it constantly? Yes, of course.
All talk. OK, can we please pull this back to Brexit? As fascinating as this is, let's pull this back to Brexit. Mark, to you first. We hear continually, if people were given the chance to vote again, they'd vote to remain. What's your conviction on this? Because don't forget the polls predicted remain last time.
Well, I did, to be fair, mention that point earlier. We were told in the run-up to the referendum by, the BBC, the CBI, the TUC, half our newspapers, the establishment on speed, that people would vote to remain. Do you know what happened at the end of all of that? Despite all of that fantastic advice, the British people had the sheer temerity to vote to govern their own country. And I cannot see them in the foreseeable future deciding to go back to being governed by somebody else.
I guess the dispiriting thing for a lot of those people who might have voted for Brexit to protect our borders is that is the very thing that they see has not happened. In fact, it's got worse in terms of that. Let me just ask you, James, what would the Labour Party do about that issue? We talk about it all the time on this channel. What would Labour do differently with our immigration situation?
I'm really not a spokesperson for the current leadership of the Labour Party, so I couldn't tell you what they would do.
What do you
My
think
guess
they
would
should
be,
do, from your
my
own
guess would
personal
be something
experience?
quite similar to what the current government is doing, but feeling a bit more squeamish about it.
OK, one final question to both of you.
So hang on a minute. So you mean doing what the Conservatives are doing, but feeling like maybe their heart isn't entirely in it, but they need to do it because it's what the British public want?
Well, I'm not convinced
Which
it is what the
basically
British public want,
summarises
but because
Corbyn's
that
attitude
is
to
the
Brexit.
direction of travel in the political discourse. And they will just follow it along, but look a little bit squeamish and upset at the same time. I mean, you see the statements that they come up with. They adopt the same framing as the government and the billionaire-owned media, and don't really put forward other solutions. So, unfortunately, that's the way this debate's going.
OK, final question to both of you. First of all, to you, Mark. Only 30% of people in this poll believe Brexit actually got done. Did we do Brexit, Mark, or did we do a watered-down version of Brino?
No, we legally left the European Union. We have left the EU. But I do think it's fair to say that the government needs to do more to explain the benefits of Brexit. I've had a go at laying some of them out this morning, but I do think the government needs to redouble its efforts in order to get that across to the British people.
Final word very quickly to James, if we could. We're very tight on time. Did we get Brexit done, James?
I mean, we've left the EU, but Brexit wasn't really about changing our institutional arrangements with the EU. It was a very good slogan, it was an extremely good campaign, but when it actually gets into coming up with policy, it's really quite difficult, which is why, despite Mark valiantly putting forward three things which aren't
guys,
benefit,
we